The dust swirled around Caleb Montgomery's worn boots as he stood at the edge of the bustling auction yard in Redemption Creek. It was 1888, and the relentless sun beat down on the parched earth, mirroring the dryness in his throat and the gnawing worry in his gut. His ranch, a patch of land he'd poured his life into, was teetering on the brink. Drought, cattle rustlers, and mounting debts were slowly strangling his dream. He was here to sell a few head of cattle, hoping to stave off the inevitable, but mostly he felt a profound sense of weariness. The auctioneer's voice, hoarse and relentless, droned on, a cacophony of bids for livestock, tools, and the scattered remnants of broken dreams. Caleb watched, detached, until a sudden shift in the crowd's murmur caught his attention. His gaze drifted to the makeshift stage, a crude wooden platform usually reserved for prize bulls. There, next to a pen of squealing pigs, stood a young woman. Her dress, though simple, was clean, but her shoulders were hunched, and her face was obscured by a bonnet pulled low. A brutish man, clearly her owner for the day, stood beside her, his hand gripping her arm, his voice a low, threatening rumble only she could hear. "Next up, folks, we have a unique lot," the auctioneer bellowed, a cruel glint in his eye. "Debts to be paid, folks, debts to be paid. We've got a young woman here, strong, healthy, ready for work. What am I bid for a willing pair of hands?" A ripple of uneasy whispers spread through the crowd, quickly drowned out by a smattering of lewd jokes and low bids. Caleb felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen many ugly things in the West, but this was different. It was a stark, brutal reminder of how easily a person could become property, how quickly dignity could be stripped away. His eyes, usually keen and observant, locked onto her. At that precise moment, as if sensing his gaze, she slowly lifted her head. The bonnet slipped back slightly, revealing a face smudged with dust and weariness, but with eyes that held an undeniable spark of defiance, of raw, unyielding spirit. Her gaze, direct and unwavering, met his across the dusty expanse of the auction yard. It was a silent plea, a desperate challenge, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. It was a look that bypassed the rough exterior of the world and burrowed deep into something forgotten within him. In that fleeting second, the noise of the auction faded, the sun's glare softened, and the weight of his own troubles momentarily lifted. He saw not just a victim, but a survivor, a person refusing to be broken. $50! Caleb's voice, usually quiet and measured, boomed across the shocked crowd. The auctioneer paused, mid-sentence, his jaw slack. The auctioneer, recovering, quickly hammered his gavel. $50, going once, going twice, sold, to the rancher, Mr. Montgomery. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Caleb pushed through the throng, his heart thudding a strange rhythm against his ribs. He approached the platform, the young woman still standing motionless beside the pigs, her eyes now downcast. The brutish man, glaring, shoved her roughly forward. "She's yours, rancher," he spat, holding out a dirty hand for the money. Caleb silently counted out the bills, his gaze lingering on the young woman. He still didn't know her name. He didn't know why he'd done it. All he knew was that for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of purpose beyond just survival. He looked at her again. She slowly, hesitantly raised her eyes to meet his. This time the defiance was still there, but mixed with a fragile tremor of surprise, perhaps even a sliver of hope. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Elara," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant squeals of the pigs. Caleb nodded. "All right, Elara, we're going to my ranch. It's a long ride." He turned to the onlookers, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. He knew the whispers would follow him, that rumors would fly. A rancher buying a woman at auction, like livestock, But as he looked at Elara, who was now slowly, tentatively taking a step towards him, he knew he had done the right thing, even if he couldn't explain why. The journey had just begun, and the dusty roads of the West lay stretched out before them, uncertain and full of untold challenges. The ride to Caleb's ranch was long and mostly silent. Elara sat stiffly beside him on the wagon seat, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The vast, open landscape of the American West stretched endlessly around them, a harsh beauty of dry scrubland, distant mesas, and a sky that seemed to swallow everything whole. The heat was relentless, and the dust, stirred by the wagon wheels, clung to everything. Caleb tried to make small talk, awkward at best. He spoke of the land, the unpredictable weather, the difficulties of ranching. Elara offered only monosyllabic replies, her voice soft and hesitant. He didn't press her. He could sense the layers of fear and caution she carried, like protective armor. He knew she had been through something terrible, something that had led her to that auction block. He wasn't going to pry, not yet. Trust, he knew, was something earned in this unforgiving land. As they drove, Caleb observed her. Her hands, though calloused, seemed capable. Her posture, despite her weariness, held a subtle resilience. He noticed the way her eyes, when she thought he wasn't looking, darted around, taking everything in, the sparse vegetation, the distant cattle, the way he handled the reins. She was assessing, calculating, a survivor's instinct. He pointed out landmarks, a gnarled mesquite tree, a cluster of red rocks that looked like sleeping giants. He explained the importance of finding water sources, the constant vigilance against predators, both animal and human. He spoke not to fill the silence, but to provide context, to show her the world she was entering, or perhaps re-entering. By late afternoon, the ranch came into view. A small, unassuming cabin, a sturdy corral, and a few outbuildings, all weathered by years of sun and wind. It was humble, but it was home, and it was his. As they pulled up, a scruffy, loyal border collie, Old Blue, emerged from the shade of the porch, tail wagging cautiously. "Welcome to the Montgomery Ranch," Caleb said, his voice a little softer than before. He dismounted and extended a hand to help Elara down. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but he felt a faint tremor. Inside the cabin, it was simple, clean, and sparsely furnished. A single cot in the corner, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a small stone fireplace. Caleb gestured to the cot. "You can rest here. I'll be outside with the cattle." Elara nodded, still silent. As Caleb turned to leave, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." It was a small word, but it resonated deeply in the quiet cabin. He paused, then nodded back. "We'll figure things out, Elara, one day at a time." He spent the rest of the evening tending to the cattle, the familiar rhythm of ranch work a comforting balm. He thought about the auction, about the desperate look in Elara's eyes, about the impulsive decision that had brought her here. He had no illusions about marriage or romance. He was a rancher, she was, a woman he'd bought. But there was something, a quiet understanding that had passed between them, a shared sense of being adrift in a harsh world. He knew this was not a matter of ownership, but of survival, and perhaps of finding a new path together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, and the vast silence of the prairie settled around them, a witness to their unspoken pact. Life on the Montgomery Ranch settled into a cautious rhythm. Elara, despite her initial reticence, proved herself to be resilient and resourceful. She took on chores with quiet determination, cooking, cleaning, tending to the small vegetable patch Caleb had neglected. She rarely spoke of her past, but her movements, Her occasional flinches at sudden noises and the haunted look that sometimes crossed her eyes spoke volumes of a life marked by hardship and fear. Caleb respected her silence, offering comfort through actions rather than words. He ensured she had proper food, a safe place to sleep, and never pushed her for details. He saw her not as a possession, but as a person, scarred yet unbroken, who needed space and safety to heal. He taught her about the ranch, the cycles of the seasons, the language of the land. He found himself talking more, sharing stories of his own struggles, of the loneliness of the frontier. Slowly, a fragile trust began to grow between them, woven into the fabric of shared meals and quiet evenings. One evening, as a dust storm brewed on the horizon, painting the sky an ominous orange, Elara was mending a torn shirt by the light of a flickering oil lamp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Suddenly, a distant crack of thunder echoed, and Elara flinched violently, dropping the shirt. Her breath hitched, and she instinctively covered her head with her arms, her body trembling. Caleb, who had been cleaning his rifle, looked up, startled. "Elara, what's wrong?" She was curled into a small ball, tears streaming down her face, murmuring incoherent words. "No. Please. Don't." He recognized the raw terror in her voice. He put down his rifle and approached her slowly, careful not to startle her further. "Elara, it's just a storm. You're safe here." He knelt beside her, his voice low and calm. "No one's going to hurt you. You're safe." Slowly she uncurled, her eyes wide and unfocused. She looked at him, and for the first time the dam within her broke. The words tumbled out, fragmented at first, then gaining a desperate urgency. She spoke of her family, homesteaders who had fallen on hard times, of a ruthless land speculator, Blackwood, who had driven them from their land, claiming false debts, of her father's desperate struggle and her mother's illness. And then, the darkest part, how, after her parents' death, Blackwood had taken her, holding her captive, using her as collateral, eventually selling her at the auction to clear his remaining debts. The thunder outside seemed to punctuate her painful narrative. He used to whip me. If I didn't work fast enough," she sobbed, her voice cracking, "and he kept me locked up, said I was his property." Caleb listened, his jaw tight. The anger in him simmered, a cold, hard rage against the man who had done such unspeakable things. He understood now the fear, the constant vigilance in her eyes. He reached out hesitantly and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He can't hurt you here, Elara," Caleb said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Not anymore. You're safe. I promise you that." She looked at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his, seeking truth in his words. In that moment, something shifted between them. The careful distance evaporated, replaced by a deeper bond, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of her pain and his quiet resolve. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cabin, a fragile sense of peace and a burgeoning sense of mutual protection began to take root. The shadows of Elara's past were revealed, and Caleb knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would protect her from them, no matter the cost. With Elara's past laid bare, a new dynamic settled over the ranch. The tentative trust between them blossomed into an unspoken bond. Elara, feeling truly safe for the first time in years, began to shed some of her fear. Her laughter, soft at first, began to punctuate the quiet evenings. She started taking more initiative, not just with chores, but suggesting improvements around the ranch, a better irrigation system for the garden, a more efficient way to mend fences. Caleb, in turn, found himself relying on her insights, valuing her perspective. He saw her not just as a survivor, but as a partner. One sweltering afternoon, a group of Blackwood's men, recognized by their distinctively marked horses, rode past the ranch, their eyes lingering too long on the cabin. Elara, who was outside hanging laundry, froze, her body tensing. Caleb, who had been checking on the cattle, saw her reaction and the menacing glares of the riders. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Blackwood had not forgotten her. That evening, a tension hung heavy in the air. Elara was quieter than usual, her gaze often drifting to the window. Caleb, sharpening his knife by the fire, spoke softly. "They won't come near. I'm here." Elara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. "He won't give up, Caleb. He's a cruel man. He won't let go of what he thinks is his." Caleb met her gaze, his expression resolute. "He won't get you. Not while I'm breathing." The next few days were tense. Caleb spent more time patrolling the ranch's perimeter, his rifle always within reach. Elara, despite her fear, insisted on helping, keeping watch from the cabin windows, her eyes sharp and alert. Their shared vulnerability against a common threat drew them even closer. The unspoken affection between them deepened, not with grand gestures, but with quiet acts of care. A shared meal under the stars, a concerned glance, a hand resting briefly on an arm in passing. One day, Caleb was working on a broken fence post far from the cabin when he heard the distinct sound of horses approaching at a gallop. His heart leaped into his throat. He saw a cloud of dust on the horizon, too large for just a few riders. This was more than a scouting party. This was Blackwood coming for her. He sprinted back towards the cabin, yelling Elara's name. She was already at the door, her face pale, holding a worn shotgun he had shown her how to use. Her hands trembled, but her eyes, though terrified, held a fierce determination. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caleb knew they were outnumbered, but he also knew he wouldn't let them take her. He positioned himself by the cabin door, rifle at the ready. Elara stood beside him, the shotgun clutched to her chest. The approaching riders, led by Blackwood himself, pulled up outside the cabin, dust billowing around them. Blackwood, a hulking man with a cruel sneer, dismounted, his eyes fixing on Elara with a possessive glint. "Well, well, if it isn't my lost property," he sneered. "Come on out, girl. You belong to me." Elara instinctively pressed herself closer to Caleb. Caleb raised his rifle, aiming it steadily at Blackwood. "She's not your property. She's a free woman, and she's staying." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop me, rancher? I have more men than you have sense." The standoff was tense, the air thick with menace. Caleb knew this was a fight he might not win, but as he looked at Elara, her eyes filled with a quiet strength despite her fear, he knew he would face it. The bond between them, forged in adversity, was now being tested, and it was stronger than any chains Blackwood could ever forge. The tense standoff with Blackwood was broken by the arrival of Sheriff Brody and his deputies, who had been tracking Blackwood for his crimes. A brief shootout ensued, and Blackwood and his men were quickly subdued and arrested. With the threat gone, a profound sense of relief washed over Caleb and Elara. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. The drought ended, and Caleb, with Elara's help, expanded their cattle and improved the land. Their unspoken bond deepened into something profound. One evening, Caleb confessed to Elara that being with her made the ranch feel like a true home. Taking her hand, he proposed, saying he saw his future in her eyes and wanted her as his wife. Elara, overcome with tears and a radiant hope, accepted, remembering the initial spark between them at the auction and how he had given her back her dignity. They soon had a simple wedding at the ranch, witnessed by Sheriff Brody and close neighbors. Their life together, built on hard work and mutual understanding, was a testament to a love that grew from the most improbable of beginnings. Elara, once auctioned-like property, found her true worth and a future in Caleb's unwavering gaze, seeing not a possession, but a promise.